The Persian Gulf, an Iranian F-14 Tomcat was already screaming toward the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln at 600 knots. This was not a routine intercept. The pilot had ignored 3 radio warnings and was now inside the final defensive envelope. The question that haunted the radar operators was not if the jet would hit. It was why the pilot had waited until he was directly over the carrier to activate his targeting radar. The morning sun was a white disk, hanging in a haze of salt and humidity. Below the Tomcat, the carrier looked like a gray splinter on a sheet of blue glass. The heat on the flight deck was already 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and sea salt. It was a morning that should have been defined by training cycles. Instead, it was defined by the screech of a twin-engine fighter accelerating past its structural limits. Inside the Combat Information Center of the carrier, the air was cold and smelled of ozone. Rows of blue light illuminated the faces of young sailors. They watched the glowing track of the Iranian jet. It was moving too fast for a standard reconnaissance run. It was a suicide profile. The tactical action officer spoke into his headset. Bridge. Combat. Target is at 12 miles. Speed is 600 knots. Altitude is 500 feet. He is not responding to the guard frequency. The captain of the Abraham Lincoln stood on the bridge. He gripped the metal railing until his knuckles turned white. He looked out through the thick glass at the empty horizon. He could not see the jet yet, but he could feel the vibration of the ship increasing as the engines pushed for 30 knots. The captain responded, "Combat. Bridge. Continue warnings. Alert the air wing. I want the alert. 15 fighters on the catapult now." 500 feet above the water, the Iranian pilot felt the heavy pull of G-forces. His name was Major Reza Zandi. He did not look at the horizon. He looked at the green, glowing glass of his head-up display. The American carrier was centered in his reticle. His cockpit was loud. The wind roared against the canopy. The vibration of the old airframe was a constant shudder in his spine. Major Zandi spoke to his backseat officer. "Target is locked. Distance is 10 miles. The radar intercept officer replied, "The Americans are painting us with fire control radar. We are 10 seconds from their missile engagement zone. Keep the lock," Zandi said. "We need them to see us. We need them to know we are not turning away." On the flight deck of the Abraham Lincoln, the yellow-shirted deck handlers scrambled. 2 F-14 Super Hornets were being hooked to the catapults. The steam from the deck rose in white plumes, blurring the vision of the ground crews. The noise was a physical wall of sound. The pilots inside the Hornets checked their systems. They were waiting for the command to launch. They were waiting to defend their home. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tone of the room changed. A sharp electronic chirp cut through the quiet murmurs. It was the sound of a terminal threat. The radar operator called out, "Sir, target is at 8 miles. He has transitioned to a combat descent. He is dropping to 200 feet. He is accelerating. Mach 0.9. The tactical action officer looked at the captain. "Sir, he is inside the box. We have a clear track. Permission to engage with the Sea Sparrow missiles." The captain did not answer immediately. He knew the cost of the first shot. He knew that if he fired, the world would change before the sun reached its peak. He watched the digital clock on the bulkhead. The seconds ticked away with agonizing precision. The captain keyed his radio. "One more warning. Use his tail number. Tell him he is standing on the edge of a grave." The radio operator's voice was steady but high-pitched. "Iranian aircraft on heading 180. You are approaching a United States carrier strike group. Your intentions are hostile. Turn away immediately or you will be destroyed." There was no reply from the sky. Only the growing roar of a Pratt & Whitney engine. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. The radar screens on the Abraham Lincoln pulsed with a steady green light. The contact was no longer a vague shape on the edge of the scan. It was a signature. A Grumman F-14 Tomcat. In the Combat Information Center, the air felt heavier. The temperature was kept low to protect the computers, but the men were sweating. The senior chief petty officer adjusted his headset. His eyes were fixed on the speed readout, 620 knots. The aircraft was pushing the sound barrier at sea level. The air resistance was immense. The heat generated on the wings would be enough to melt plastic. The Tomcat was screaming. The chief spoke to the tactical action officer. "Sir, he is not just closing, he is hunting. He has locked his radar onto our primary air search array. Intercut. He is painting us for a Phoenix missile. Does he have a launch rail clear?" "Negative, sir. His wings are swept back for high speed." 5 miles away, the ocean surface was a blur of white foam. Major Zandi felt the vibration through his flight suit. The Tomcat was an old machine. It was a relic of a different era, but it was a heavy weight. It was a sledgehammer in the sky. He could see the carrier now. It was a massive steel island. He saw the white wakes of the escort destroyers. They were like wolves circling a whale. "Reza, the Americans are activating electronic countermeasures. My screen is a wash of white noise. I am losing the track of the carrier." "Stay with it," Zandi said. "Switch to manual override. Use the infrared search and track system. Look for the heat of their engines." Zandi gripped the control stick. He felt the sweat running down his back. It pooled under his survival vest. He had to show the Americans that the Gulf was not their private pond. He had to prove that the old Tomcat still had teeth. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the captain watched the horizon. A speck of black appeared against the yellow haze, trailing a thin line of black smoke. "Visual contact," the captain said. 8 miles out. He is low. He is far too low. The carrier was a hive of controlled chaos. On the flight deck, the F-14 pilots were finishing their pre-flight checks. They could hear the roar of the approaching Tomcat now. It was a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated the deck plating under their boots. The sailors on the catwalks looked toward the bow. They saw the intruder. They saw death coming at them at 10 miles a minute. "This is the United States ship Abraham Lincoln. If you do not break off your approach, we will defend ourselves with lethal force. This is your final warning." Major Zandi heard the message. He did not flinch. He brought the nose of the Tomcat down another 50 feet, skimming the tops of the waves. "Afshar, activate the master arm. Do not fire. Just let them hear the system cycle on their sensors. Master arm is on. We are now a live threat." In the radar room, a new alarm screamed. It was a high-pitched, rhythmic pulse. "Sir, he just armed his weapons. The Tomcat is hot. He is ready to fire." The tactical action officer looked at the captain. The decision was no longer tactical. It was existential. The distance was closing at a rate of 1 mile every 6 seconds. The captain looked at the black speck in the sky. It was no longer a speck. It was a killing machine. "Engage," the captain said. "1 Sea Sparrow, center of mass, defend the ship." The silence of the morning was shattered by the hiss of a pneumatic launcher. A white streak of fire erupted from the side of the carrier. 8:06 in the morning. The radar screens on the Abraham Lincoln pulsed with a steady green light. The contact was no longer a vague shape on the edge of the scan. It was a signature. A Grumman F-14 Tomcat. In the Combat Information Center, the air felt heavier. The temperature was kept low, but the men were sweating. The senior chief petty officer adjusted his headset. His eyes were fixed on the speed readout. 620 knots. The aircraft was pushing the sound barrier at sea level. The air resistance was immense. The Tomcat was screaming. The chief spoke to the tactical action officer. "Sir, he is not just closing. He is hunting. He has locked his radar onto our primary air search array. That is a fire control lock. He is painting us for a Phoenix missile. Does he have a launch rail clear?" "Negative, sir. His wings are swept back for high speed. We cannot see his belly yet, but he is emitting enough energy to fry a bird." 5 miles away, the ocean surface was a blur of white foam. Major Zandi felt the vibration through his flight suit. He could see the carrier now. It was no longer a gray splinter. It was a massive steel island. He saw the white wakes of the escort destroyers. They were turning hard to put their missile batteries in line with his flight path. They were like wolves circling a wounded whale. Afshar called out, "Reza, the Americans are activating electronic countermeasures. My screen is awash of white noise." "Stay with it," Zandi said. "Switch to manual override. Use the infrared search and track system. Look for the heat of their engines." Zandi gripped the control stick. He felt the sweat running down his back under his survival vest. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the captain watched the horizon through binoculars. A speck of black appeared against the yellow haze. It was trailing a thin line of black smoke from its twin engines. It was a thumb in the eye of the modern world. "Visual contact," the captain said. 8 miles out. He is low. He is far too low. The carrier was a hive of controlled chaos. On the flight deck, the F-18 pilots were finishing their pre-flight checks. They could hear the roar of the Tomcat. It was a guttural thrum that vibrated the deck plating under their boots. The radio crackled. "This is the USS Abraham Lincoln. If you do not break off your approach, we will defend ourselves with lethal force." Major Zandi did not flinch. He brought the nose of the Tomcat down another 50 feet, skimming the tops of the waves. "Afshar, activate the master arm. Do not fire. Just let them hear the system cycle on their sensors." "Master arm is on," Afshar replied. "We are now a live threat. The Americans will see the signal. They will know we are hot." In the radar room, a new alarm screamed. "Sir, he just armed his weapons. The Tomcat is hot. He is ready to fire." The tactical action officer looked at the captain. The distance was closing at a rate of 1 mile every 6 seconds. "Captain," the officer said, "we are out of tactical options. We have to take the shot." The captain looked at the black speck. It was a killing machine. The sun caught the canopy, looking like a flash of fire. "Engage," the captain said. "1 Sea Sparrow. Center of mass." A white streak of fire erupted from the side of the carrier. The Sea Sparrow missile surged from its launch canister, a white-hot spear of light against the morning haze. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the air seemed to vanish as every eye was fixed on the white smoke trail. The missile accelerated to Mach 2 in less than 3 seconds, seeking the heat and metal of the Iranian Tomcat. Major Zandi saw the flash on his warning receiver, the high-pitched scream in his headset sounding a terminal lock. He did not panic, having trained for this moment in the simulators over the salt flats of his home. He pulled the control stick hard to the right and slammed the throttles into full afterburner. He punched the flare release button. Magnesium candles tumbled from the belly of the jet, burning like small stars. The Sea Sparrow took the bait, pivoting toward the heat and detonating 300 feet behind the Tomcat. The blast wave was a physical hammer that slammed into the tail of the Iranian fighter, the aircraft bucking like a wild horse. Zandi fought the controls as the hydraulic pressure fluctuated, still flying and closing. The radar operator shouted that the target was still on the scope, having survived the early detonation. The carrier was now at general quarters, steel doors slamming shut across 10 decks as men manned battle stations. The sound of the alarm was a rhythmic pulse that drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. On the flight deck, the first F-18 Super Hornet was ready, the pilot giving the thumbs up to the catapult officer. With a violent hiss of steam, the fighter was hurled into the sky, clearing the bow in a hard climbing turn. The American pilot Raven 1 was breathing hard into his oxygen mask, reporting visual on the intruder. The controller responded, "Raven 1, do not fire unless fired upon. The situation is red." The captain watched the tactical display as 2 dots closed on each other at over 1,000 miles per hour. The ocean below was a blur of blue and white. The tension in the room was a physical weight. The Iranian command center at Bandar Abbas was fully engaged, seeing the American launch and their Tomcat under fire. 4 more Iranian fighters rolled down coastal runways, heavily armed with anti-ship missiles. The Iranian commander spoke, "Major Zandi, you have drawn their fire. The Americans have initiated hostilities." Zandi, busy flying, saw the unmistakable silhouette of the American Super Hornet diving from the clouds. Zandi knew his old Tomcat was outclassed. He was here to be a target, a lure. The Super Hornet pulled alongside the Tomcat, the 2 pilots looking at each other across a 50-foot gap. Zandi could see the white helmet of the American and Sidewinder missiles hanging from the wings. The American pilot spoke, "Iranian aircraft, this is your last chance. Climb and turn north." Zandi looked back, seeing the carrier and escort ships turning their guns, feeling the weight of the moment. He was the trigger for a war. The sky was crowded, and the margin for error had vanished. The shadow of the Iranian F-14 Tomcat flickered across the whitecaps of the Gulf at 8:21 in the morning over the Persian Gulf. Major Zandi was now flying at only 100 feet above the water. Beside him, less than 50 feet away, the American Super Hornet maintained a perfect formation. The roar of the 4 massive engines combined into a single, bone-shaking thunder. It was a terrifying display of precision. Neither pilot moved a muscle. They were locked in a mechanical embrace at 500 knots. Major Zandi looked to his left. He could see the American pilot clearly. The helmet was white with a black raven painted on the side. The American was looking back at him. It was a silent conversation between two professionals. Both knew that a single mid-air collision would trigger a catastrophe. Zandi felt the salt spray beginning to cloud the edges of his canopy. The air this close to the water was dense and turbulent. The American pilot, Raven 1, spoke over the guard frequency. Iranian pilot, you are dangerously low. Your current heading takes you toward our replenishment ship. You must climb and maintain a northerly heading. This is your final warning before we initiate a physical intercept. Zandi did not answer. He checked his fuel gauges. The afterburner had swallowed a massive amount of kerosene. He had maybe 20 minutes of flight time remaining before he would be forced to return to base or ditch in the sea. He looked at his radar intercept officer. Afshar, what is the status of the carrier? Lieutenant Afshar responded, they are turning into the wind. They are preparing to launch the rest of the air wing. But Reza, look at the sonar link. The shore stations are reporting a contact near the carrier. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Abraham Lincoln, the atmosphere was no longer just tense, it was frantic. A new sensor reading had appeared on the underwater warfare console. It was a rhythmic, metallic pulse. The sonar supervisor called out, Captain, we have a submerged contact, bearing 085, distance 4,000 yards. It is a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine. He is running on batteries. He is silent, but we have a transient. He just opened his torpedo tubes. The captain of the Lincoln felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was now facing a dual threat, a rogue fighter in the air and a silent killer beneath the waves. This was a coordinated trap. The Tomcat was the distraction. The submarine was the blade. The captain turned to the tactical action officer. What are our rules of engagement? We have been fired upon by the jet once. Do we have authorization to prosecute the submarine? The officer replied, Sir, the rules state we must confirm hostile intent. Opening tubes is a hostile act. However, the Pentagon is still calling for restraint. They want us to wait for a positive identification of a launched weapon. The captain struck the console with his palm. If we wait for a torpedo to launch, we have less than 60 seconds to react. That is not restraint. That is a suicide pact. Major Zandi saw the carrier begin a violent turn to the starboard side at 8:24 in the morning. The massive ship was leaning, its flight deck tilting toward the horizon. They were trying to complicate the firing solution for the submarine. Zandi knew he had to keep their attention on the sky. He pulled the control stick back and slammed the throttles forward. The Tomcat lunged upward in a sudden, vertical climb. Raven 1 followed him instantly. The two jets spiraled into the morning haze like twin silver needles. At the peak of the climb, Zandi kicked the rudder and inverted the aircraft. He looked down through the glass at the carrier. He saw the white wakes of the destroyers as they began to drop depth charges into the water. The sea erupted in massive plumes of white water. The American pilot shouted over the radio, Control! The intruder is maneuvering aggressively. He is attempting to gain a high 6 position. I am moving to a combat spread. The sky was no longer empty. It was a battlefield. The surface of the water was being torn apart by explosives. The air was being carved by supersonic engines. The distance between peace and war was now measured in inches. Over the Persian Gulf, the sky over the carrier strike group was a bruised shade of yellow. The humidity had climbed to 90%. It felt like a wet wool blanket draped over the steel decks of the USS Abraham Lincoln. On the aft sponsons of the ship, the close-in weapon system mounts began to dance. The 20mm Gatling guns, known to the crew as Sea Whiz, tracked the sky with terrifying fluidity. Their white radar domes turned in unison. They were following the Iranian F-14 Tomcat as it crested the top of its vertical climb. The sound of the electric motors was a high-pitched whine that cut through the roar of the ocean. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer stood behind the weapons console. His hand was hovering over the master arm switch for the entire ship. This was the maximum state of readiness. Every missile was warm, every radar was slaved to a target. There was no more room for diplomacy. The officer spoke to the captain. Sir, the Iranian jet is at the apex. He is rolling inverted. He is coming back down directly at our flight deck. At the same time, the destroyer Sterett is reporting a high-speed underwater contact. We have 2 minutes until the air threat is in lethal range. We have 90 seconds until the submarine is in a firing position. The captain of the Lincoln looked at the main tactical screen. The Tomcat is a distraction. Sterett, this is Lincoln. You are cleared to prosecute the submerged contact. Destroy that submarine before he can clear his tubes. 2 miles away, the guided missile destroyer USS Sterett leaned into a hard turn. The bow of the ship sliced through a swell, sending a wall of white spray 50 feet into the air. On the aft deck, the anti-submarine rocket launcher rose to its firing angle. The crew inside the sonar shack watched the glowing green line of the torpedo track. The captain of the Sterett gave the order, "Launch the rocket, now." In the cockpit of the F-14, Major Zandi felt the weight of his aircraft as he pushed the nose down. He was in a screaming dive. The carrier filled his entire world. He saw individual sailors running for cover on the flight deck. He saw the white smoke from the Sea Sparrow launcher. He saw the American Super Hornet closing in on his left side. Reza, the American destroyer has fired. They are attacking our submarine. We have to respond. If we do not act now, our men will drown in the dark. Zandi's finger moved to the weapon release button on the control stick. He flipped the safety cover up. The word "armed" appeared in red on his display. "Afshar," Zandi said. "Lock the destroyer. We are not hitting the carrier. We are going to kill the ship that is killing our brothers." The American pilot in the Super Hornet saw the Tomcat's nose dip toward the Sterett. He saw the weapons bay doors of the Iranian jet begin to cycle open. Raven 1 keyed his radio. "Control, Raven 1. The intruder is diving on the Sterett. He is hot. I am engaging now." The American pilot reached for his own weapon switch. He selected a Sidewinder heat-seeking missile. The high-pitched growl of the seeker head filled his helmet. He pulled his aircraft into a tight turn, the G-forces crushing his lungs. He was moving into the 6 o'clock position behind the Tomcat. 8:28 in the morning. The silence of the Gulf was gone. The transition from tension to violence was complete. The world was about to break. 8:29 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The trigger on the control stick of the Super Hornet was a cold piece of plastic under the glove of Raven 1. He squeezed. The Sidewinder missile screamed out of its launch rail with a white-hot jet of fire. The heat blasted back across the wing of the American fighter, momentarily obscuring the pilot's view. White smoke rolled up in a dense column, trailing the missile as it arced through the humid air. It was a streak of white light tearing through the yellow darkness of the haze. Major Zandi saw the flash in his mirror. He did not have time to pray. He pulled the nose of the Tomcat up in a desperate attempt to overshoot. He punched the final remaining flares. But the distance was too short. The Sidewinder was a relentless hunter. It ignored the magnesium decoys and adjusted its flight path in a fraction of a second. The warhead punched through the right engine nozzle of the F-14 and detonated inside the turbine assembly. The engine ignited instantly. A fireball that turned the sky white erupted from the tail of the Iranian jet. The explosion shredded the titanium casing of the engine, sending thousands of jagged metal fragments through the rear fuselage. Hot hydraulic fluid sprayed into the slipstream and caught fire, creating a long tail of orange flame. The right vertical stabilizer was ripped apart, its composite skin peeling away like charred paper. Inside the cockpit, the shockwave slammed into Major Zandi's spine. The concussion compressed his chest and knocked the air from his lungs. The shriek of tearing metal was a physical weight that filled his ears. The Tomcat bucked violently. It began a slow, sickening roll to the right as the flight controls failed. The smell of burning propellant and scorched metal filled the cabin. But Zandi had already done his job. In the same second that the Sidewinder had left its rail, he had released his own weapon. The anti-ship missile dropped from the belly of the Tomcat and its booster ignited. It was a heavy, blunt-nosed killer. It dropped to 10 feet above the water and accelerated to its terminal velocity. It was headed straight for the USS Sterett. 8:29 and 30 seconds in the morning. The anti-ship missile slammed into the side of the USS Sterett just above the waterline. The warhead punched clean through the port side armor and detonated inside the secondary mess deck. The impact was not a sound. It was a vibration that shook the entire 3,000-ton vessel. The hull split open. A rolling sphere of orange and black smoke erupted from the puncture. The warhead exploded outward, throwing heavy steel bulkheads and equipment into the sea. The heat blast swept across the midship section, searing the paint off the superstructure and igniting the fire suppression lines. Inside the ship, the concussion killed the lights and shattered the glass on every monitor in the bridge. The Sterett listed 5 degrees to port immediately. Thick black smoke climbed from the wreckage, curling up toward the radar masts. The side taking the hit did not stand still. The crew of the Sterett reacted with the speed of a wounded predator. The damage control team scrambled toward the breach, their yellow suits bright against the black smoke. On the aft deck, the remaining missile battery fired a defensive salvo in a blind, reflexive attempt to clear the air. The ship began a hard turn to the starboard side to keep the fire from spreading toward the fuel bunkers. In the sky, the Tomcat was disintegrating. Major Zandi fought the controls, his hands blurring as he flipped switches. The aircraft was trailing a 300-foot plume of fire and debris. The right wing was glowing red from the heat of the burning fuel. Lieutenant Afshar was slumped in the back seat. 8:30 in the morning. The surface of the Gulf was a graveyard of burning metal. The Sterett was a blackened ruin midships. The Tomcat was a falling star, dropping toward the waves at 400 knots. Burning fragments still flickered. 3 seconds of dead silence fell across the common radio frequency. Then voices erupted on every channel at once. The ocean was covered in a layer of black oil and white foam. Debris from the Tomcat's engine continued to rain down. The battle had been short. The cost was already absolute. 8:31 in the morning. The pivot happened not with a bang, but with a terrifying silence. Across the entire Persian Gulf, every digital screen on every warship and in every cockpit went black. The Aegis radar on the Abraham Lincoln, the targeting computer in the Super Hornet, and the remaining navigation systems in Major Zandi's crippled Tomcat died at the exact same millisecond. It was as if a giant hand had reached down and unplugged the electronic soul of the modern world. The American pilot, Raven 1, stared at his darkened displays. His head-up display, which had been his primary window into the battle, was now just a pane of empty glass. Control. Raven 1. I have a total power failure. My flight surfaces are heavy. I am losing trim. What is the status of the carrier? There was no answer. The radio was a wall of dead static. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the captain grabbed the railing as the ship's steering went limp. The massive vessel was still carrying 30 knots of momentum, but she was now a blind giant. The hundreds of millions of dollars of sensors that protected the strike group were useless. The sailors in the Combat Information Center sat in total darkness, illuminated only by the flickering red of the emergency battery lamps. Then, through the haze, a new shape appeared. It was not a jet, it was not a ship. It was a silver distortion in the air, hanging directly between the burning USS Sterett and the falling Iranian Tomcat. It had no wings. It had no visible engines. It was a perfect, polished sphere, roughly 30 meters in diameter. It moved with a physical grace that defied the laws of inertia, stopping instantly in midair above the churning water. Major Zandi, struggling to stay conscious in his smoke-filled cockpit, looked out through the scorched canopy. He saw the sphere. He saw the way the sunlight rolled across its surface like liquid mercury. He felt a strange humming vibration in his teeth. It was a sound that was felt rather than heard, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to resonate with the very molecules of the ocean. The Tomcat was still falling, but its descent began to slow. It was as if the air around the aircraft had become as thick as honey. The flames on the right engine did not go out, but they froze in place, held in a static bloom of orange and red. The debris from the Sterett's explosion suspended itself in midair, jagged pieces of steel hanging like ornaments in the sky. 8:34 in the morning. The sphere began to glow. A soft, blue light emanated from its center, expanding outward until it touched the hull of the Sterett and the wings of the Tomcat. On the bridge of the carrier, the captain watched through his binoculars. He saw the blue light wash over his sailors. He expected a scream, an explosion, or a flash of heat. Instead, the screaming stopped. The fires on the Sterett's deck vanished. The black smoke was sucked back into the hull, as if time were being reversed. The jagged hole in the side of the destroyer did not repair itself, but the edges of the metal were suddenly smoothed, the white-hot heat drawn out of the steel. The wounded men on the mess deck, who had been gasping in the smoke, suddenly found they could breathe. The air was cool and smelled of mountain ozone. Inside the Tomcat, Major Zandi felt the heat leave his cockpit. The smell of burning oil disappeared. He looked at his hand. It was no longer shaking. The red warning lights on his console were still dark, but the aircraft was stable. It was floating. The sphere did not speak. It did not send a signal. But every mind within 5 miles felt a single, overwhelming sensation. It was not a word. It was a command. It was the feeling of a parent stepping between two brawling children. It was a cold, absolute insistence on stillness. The American pilot in the Super Hornet banked his jet around the sphere. He was flying on manual backup, his hands white on the stick. He saw the Iranian jet hanging in the air. He saw his own missile smoke trail frozen in a static line behind him. "Whoever you are," the captain of the Lincoln whispered to the empty bridge, "you just stopped a world war." The sphere remained for exactly 60 seconds. Then it began to shrink. It collapsed inward on itself, becoming a point of blinding white light. With a sound like a single, sharp intake of breath, it vanished. The electronic systems of the fleet roared back to life. The screens flickered, the radios hissed with white noise. The Aegis radar began its rhythmic sweep of the empty sky. The Tomcat's engine began to burn again. Gravity returned with a vengeance. Over the Persian Gulf at 8:36 in the morning, the weight of gravity returned like a physical blow as the silver sphere vanished and the world resumed its violent trajectory. Major Zandi felt the Tomcat lurch and drop. The right engine, which had been frozen in a state of static combustion, flared back to life with a jagged, uneven roar. Thick, oily smoke once again poured from the shredded turbine. The cockpit filled with the rhythmic screaming of a dozen master caution alarms. The silence of the intervention was replaced by the chaotic reality of a dying aircraft, as Zandi grabbed the control stick with both hands and called out, "Afshar, talk to me. Are you conscious?" A groan came over the intercom. "I am here. My head. The light." "What was that, Reza?" "I do not know," Zandi shouted over the wind. "But the fire is back. We are losing altitude. I am attempting to trim for a flat glide. We have no hydraulic pressure in the primary lines." 2 miles away, the USS Sterett was no longer a frozen tableau. The black smoke that had been sucked back into the hull erupted outward again, though with less intensity than before. The fires on the mess deck had been suppressed, but the structural damage remained. The destroyer was still listing to port, its hull groaning as seawater surged against the jagged puncture. The captain of the Sterett keyed his handheld radio. "All stations. Damage control. Report. We have a hull breach at frame 62. I need the P-100 pumps on the mess deck now." Inside the Combat Information Center of the Abraham Lincoln, the return of power was a frantic explosion of data. Hundreds of sensor tracks reappeared on the main wall display. "Captain, systems are back. Radar is live. But the signature of the unknown contact is gone. It left no wake, no thermal trace, nothing." The captain of the Lincoln did not look at the screen. He looked at the Sterett, then ordered, "Stand down the weapons. Do not engage the Tomcat. Focus all assets on the Sterett." 8:45 in the morning. The ocean was a chaotic mess of white foam and rainbow-colored oil slicks as heavy-lift helicopters began to cycle their rotors on the Lincoln. In the cockpit of the Super Hornet, Raven 1 watched the Iranian jet. He could see the jagged holes in its tail and the tongues of fire licking at the fuselage. "Control. Raven 1. The intruder is crossing the 12-mile limit. He is trailing heavy smoke. I am breaking off the intercept. Returning to the carrier." 8:50 in the morning. Major Zandi saw the coastline of Iran appearing through the haze, a brown, rocky line between the sea and the sky. "Afshar," Zandi said. "Prepare to eject. We cannot make the runway. We are going to ditch in the shallows." He pulled the handle. The canopy blew off with a roar, and the two seats were rocketed into the hot morning air. Behind them, the Tomcat, the last of its kind, rolled inverted and plunged into the shallow green water of the coast, disappearing in a plume of white spray. The sky was empty again, but the silence was different now. It was heavy with the weight of what had nearly happened. Over the Persian Gulf at 9 o'clock in the morning, Major Reza Zandi bobbed in the warm, salty water, his orange life vest a bright stain against the green shallows. 50 meters away, Lieutenant Afshar was splashing weakly, the remains of their F-14 Tomcat having already vanished beneath the surface. 9:15 in the morning. Inside the White House Situation Room, high-resolution satellite imagery showed the USS Abraham Lincoln and the blackened shape of the USS Sterett. Raven 1's gun camera footage showed the silver sphere for a few frames before electronic interference turned the video into a wash of gray snow. 9:45 in the morning. Inside the command bunker at Bandar Abbas, the Iranian admiral watched the radar screen as his rescue helicopters picked up Zandi and Afshar. The USS Sterett was now tethered to a fleet ocean tug, the thick nylon hawser groaning under tension as they moved slowly toward deep water. The flag on the carrier was flying at half-mast while the bodies of 6 shipmates, wrapped in black bags, were transferred by helicopter. F-18 pilots sat on the edges of their ejection seats, staring at the empty sky where the sphere had been. 11 o'clock in the morning. The Persian Gulf returned to uneasy peace, its waves lapping against the blackened hull of the Sterett. The USS Abraham Lincoln moved at a steady 15 knots through the Gulf of Oman, its bow cutting through a sea that was finally as calm as blue glass. The flight deck was no longer a stage for combat. 500 sailors stood in formation, their white uniforms stark against the gray non-skid surface. 6 caskets, draped in the American flag, rested on wooden biers near the edge of the elevator. The humid air was heavy with the metallic tang of the ship's vents. The captain stood at the podium. He did not look at his notes. He looked at the faces of the young men and women who had survived. "We are here to honor those who gave everything for this ship," the captain said. His voice was carried across the deck by the ship's internal speakers. "The world will remember this as a skirmish, but we know the truth. We know the cost of the watch we keep." A 3-volley salute shattered the morning silence. The sharp cracks of the rifles echoed off the carrier's superstructure, sounding like the snapping of dry wood. Then, one by one, the caskets were committed to the deep. They slid into the warm water of the Gulf, leaving only a few white bubbles. 9:30 in the morning. Major Reza Zandi sat on the edge of a white hospital bed in Bandar Abbas Military Hospital. On the table beside him sat a single, unadorned envelope. 2 men in dark suits from the intelligence services stood by the door. One held a digital tablet containing the flight logs from Zandi's Tomcat. He tapped a command on the screen, and the data was permanently deleted. The official report is complete. You were hit by a surface-to-air missile during a routine training exercise. You ejected due to a catastrophic engine failure. There was no American carrier. There was no silver sphere. You will be awarded the Medal of Courage for your survival, but you will never speak of the light. Zandi did not look at them. He only nodded. He knew the game. Both sides were busy burying the impossible under paperwork. 2:15 in the afternoon. The Pentagon. Deep within the basement, analysts gathered in a secure room looking at a single high-resolution photograph. The photo showed the Sterett burning, the Tomcat falling, and a faint silver distortion in the center of the frame. A senior intelligence officer placed a red folder on the table. It was labeled Project Prism, Case File 062. We are calling it a localized electromagnetic discharge caused by a secret Iranian jamming project that went wrong. The object does not exist, the officer replied. It is a sensor ghost, a trick of the light. This case is closed. The room went silent as the officer took a lighter and burned the edges of the photograph. The silver distortion curled and blackened into ash. The crisis was over. The missiles had flown, and ships had been lost. But history did not end that day. It shifted. The USS Sterett reached the dry docks of Bahrain 6 hours later. The jagged hole in its side was a silent testament to the violence. They had seen the end of the world, and they had seen it stopped by a hand that was not human. The oil tankers continued to move, and the jets continued to fly. But the pilots on both sides were looking for the light.